Welcome back to Roundtail Restoration, everybody. My name is Chris. This is the empty case for a transmission that I'm rebuilding for my 1964 Triumph TR4. This is actually the original case out of the car. I also purchased an overdrive transmission, so I've taken that apart and gutted that as well. And I'm going to now be taking the best of both worlds here and combining the parts and putting them all back together. The gearboxes themselves, internal, are completely interchangeable. We're tuning overdrive and a non-overdrive with the exception of the main shaft, but all the gears and everything, all that stuff's interchangeable. So I'm going to be picking the best parts and rebuilding transmission. I am retaining the original case just from a numbers matching standpoint, but I essentially am rebuilding everything here, taking measurements as appropriate and picking the best stuff. So maybe 1 or 2 videos, maybe 3, I don't know. It's been a long time. I haven't done this except for one time on my Triumph Spitfire, and that was several years ago. So who knows how much fun I'm going to have with this. But stick around and we'll see how I get it done. So thanks for watching. Let's get it sorted. So before I get too far ahead of myself here and start filling this case up and making it hard to move around and stuff, I've got new bushings here for where the clutch shaft goes through, the operating shaft. And I was able to pick these up at Moss. No issues there, $5 or $6 each, whatever they were. If you notice, one of them's got a big old chunk cut out of it. And what that's for is there is essentially a locating bolt that goes on the starter side of the transmission housing. So over in this side over here. So the things were very easy to press out, so I'm going to go ahead and press them in now. Again, this is just to get it out of the way. Really, the only thing you need to worry about is lining up that groove so the bolt can go through. And on the other one, you don't have anything at all. The ones that I pulled out originally had little holes cut into them, and there's holes tapped into the bottom here of this case where there was grease fittings, if you remember in the video that I did when I rebuilt that clutch fork. I don't know if that was a previous owner doing that modification, if they couldn't get a hold of, if their clutch shaft had broken like mine did with the stuck fork on it, and that at the time the only thing they were able to source was the old design. I don't know, but I'm able to kind of retrofit back to the original design here, thanks to Moss and their bushings. So we're going to go ahead and press those in real quick. I'm not going to show you that. It's just a matter of knocking them in. It's not very tight, and move on to then starting up for measuring gears and stuff like that. I lied a little bit. So if you take a look at this bushing here, the groove for the retaining bolt is not right in the center. So you want to put this in where the groove tends to the bottom, because if you line it up kind of like this guy right here is where the bolt hole's coming through. Not that hole there, your bolt's coming in this way. You can see that that'll fit, whereas if you turn it around, it's going to be too high. So important safety tip here before you press this in, though they're easy to press in. I'm just using a block of wood and a hammer here. I'm not using the bench press. The one, obviously you got to make sure this gets lined up so the bolt will actually fit through it, so you don't want to put it in crooked. But it's just, you can press it all the way back through. There's a little socket that'll fit in there pretty perfectly, and we'll let you push it all the way into the case and try again if you have to. So not a big deal, but just wanted to point that out. So another important safety tip is make sure you get the thing started right before you start pounding a little bit too much, or otherwise you'll bend it like I did. So there's $5 or $6 that I'll have to do again. So we'll have to order up a new one of those from Moss. I'm sure there's parts that I can buy. So we'll obviously going to have to come back to this, and I'll do it obviously later. And I'm not going to wait though on putting the rest of the stuff together just on this bushing. So we'll move on into the guts of the transmission itself, take a lesson learned there, and continue on. So as I mentioned, we have to check bushing lengths and stuff like that to make sure that you've got a little bit of play inside the transmission, but not so much that it is sloppy, but not so little that you start grinding stuff together. So this is the first gear here, and inside you've got just a brass bushing that circulates the oil and all that. That's what those grooves are cut in for. So that'll go and fit inside of here. And then I've got the top hat, which we'll get to in a little bit. This is another bushing. And a little spacer that I'm going to stick in there. And essentially all I'm trying to do is get this set up and get it flat on there. And this bushing pressed all the way in and flush with the bottom here. It's got to be flush with this portion in here. So that's why I've got this washer to kind of help me do that. And then this top hat just to give me a a little bit of a pedestal here so I can measure it. And then what you do is I'm going to take a straight edge, put it over top of this, like so, and then try to fit a feeler gauge on this machined flat portion here. Now it's not very wide, but it should be sufficient. So the workshop manual calls out between 4 and 6 thousandths. The Greasy's Hands Garage calls out between 4 and 8 thousandths. So we'll see what we get. So you got 2 little grooves in this. You want to make sure that those aren't in your way there. And we'll just go ahead. I'm probably going to block the shot a little bit here because this is a two-handed evolution. I can see it's definitely higher. So let's try. We'll go right to 6 thousandths. And the 6 thousandths goes through pretty easily. Let's go right to 8 thousandths. And the 8 thousandths doesn't go through, so I assume the 7 will. 7's pretty tight. So I think I'm going to call that good. Even though there's a discrepancy here, I do have another one of these bushes out of the other transmission like I told you about. I'm mixing and matching here. This is so far using it out of the original transmission. And but that I measured that bush and that was almost pretty tight on here. So we're going to go with this one here. So now that one's good to go and set aside. So you want to, again, keep your spacers and everything that deal with that particular gear in the same spot. Now we can move on to second and third gear. Second gear, we're going to measure just the same way we just did that one. Again, use the top hat here. This is the second gear, probably the third gear actually. Same kind of thing where you've got a bushing inside of there. Now this is this bushing for the third gear. Again, we'll put that spacer in the bottom and use the top hat as a little pedestal. Now this one should be a little bit easier to measure because this is all nice flat machined surface. Same spec. We've got the 7 here handy. 7 is not fitting. Go all the way down to the 4. All right, so the 4 fits under there pretty good. Find the 6. And the 6 just barely gets under that. So we're going to call that bush good too. So that's a beautiful thing. So again, keep them separate. So now the one that's a little trickier is second gear here because you got this top hat and that fits down inside of that. Now the workshop manual tells you to set up the same thing except try to fit a feeler gauge up underneath this, and I'll be damned if I was able to do that. So what the Greasy Hand Garage recommends is measuring your gear thickness. So from the inside here where it's got to be flush to here where the top hat sits, and then measure the top hat, or excuse me, measure this whole bushing including the top hat, and then measure just the top hat. And what we'll do is do a calculation where you've got the total thickness of this plus the thickness of the bushing itself, and then subtract out the thickness of the top hat, and that should tell you how far above this machined in surface here that bushing would fit. So that's again going to be that spec. So we're going to go ahead and get a dial, or excuse me, a micrometer, and go ahead and do that. Now looking at this top hat, this one looks like it's cracking. Definitely looks like it's trying to crack apart. You probably won't be able to see this, but there's a crack here and a crack here. So I wouldn't be able to use this top hat. I do have another one that is in the other, came out of the overdrive gearbox. So I'm going to get that out and inspect that real quick. But I guess it's not uncommon for these top hats to break off. So, because again, it's brass, so it's pretty soft. So you want to make sure that that you check that out. So let's get that other top hat and look and see what that guy looks like. All right, here's the other top hat, but I don't see any cracks in this. Granted, it's a little bit harder to see because of the color, but I don't see any cracks or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and try to use this one. So like I had mentioned, we're going to get the micrometer out and do all these measurements here and then do some math, and we'll see what we get. All right, so first things first is we'll measure the gear itself. And again, you want to go from the inside here where that bushing is going to fit, the inside, to this recess portion here. So I got a 1 to 2 inch micrometer. It doesn't fit real well in here, but it does fit. I want to try to Try to make sure that I'm as straight and on the actual where I want to be as much as I can. And that looks good. So it looks like I'm looking at 1.156 or something like that. Now we will take this off and measure the top hat. So with this, with the new top hat here, you can see like it's all like looks like a cast iron skillet. It's all been aged just from running so much, I guess. So I've got 1.281 inches wide with the top hat, and then the top hat's coming in at about 0.120 or so. I'm going to use my calipers here just to back me up. Yeah, about 1.281 for the thickness of the entire thing. Here I'm only getting 0.112. That's not what I'm getting here. I'm getting about 0.122. Yeah, that's what I got now, 0.122. So if I do that math real quick, 1.281 minus 0.122 minus 1.155, I get a 4,000 end float. So it's telling me that it's going to be right there, right on the spec. If anything, a little bit tight, which I guess these things would wear over time. I definitely can't use this one because it's cracked. So we're going to stick with that one. So that looks good. So just made it. Now, one other thing that Greasy Hand Garage puts out is all of the measurement of the gears and everything like that, and the thickness of those. And they said they've gotten typical values and all that kind of stuff, and that's exactly the values that they're given for the gears themselves, the thickness of the gears themselves. It's exactly the values that I'm getting. Also, I had mentioned that there was a discrepancy between the Greasy Hand Garage and the workshop manual with the 4 to 6 thousandths versus the 4 to 8 thousandths on the bushing. If you look in the table in the workshop manual, it tells you 4 to 8 thousandths is the acceptable, but recommended is 4 to 6, so a little bit tighter. But anyway, that there's not a discrepancy anymore now that I found that. So now what's next? Now that I've got all the individual gears themselves set up, now you have to look at total float. And essentially what you do is have to build the bushings on the shaft, and that darn circlip has got to rear its ugly head again. So we're gonna look into doing that, and that'll be the next step. So we've got the main shaft here, and laid out here. We're gonna build the floats on this side of it. So you've got a spacer, then your top hat bushing, then your other bushing. Can't remember if that's second or third gear. I think it's third. Then a weird looking spacer, and then that damn circlip. So we're going to go ahead and build in that order. So this spacer, top hat, that bushing. Now this spacer here, you can see it's hollowed in on this side and it's flat on that side. The flat side goes out, at least according to the pictures. And then the darn circlip. Do have 2 new circlips that I purchased, so this is not one of those. So I'm not going to really care too much. I might break this or cut it down or something like this to make it a little easier to get on here. But we're going to see if I can get it on here right now anyway, using circlip pliers. I really just want to get it started. I'm not going to bore you with doing this, so if I get this thing on there, I'll come back, and if I come out with some mysterious way on being able to figure it out, then I'll share that with you. But otherwise, I'm just going to try to essentially bang it on there. So I got the circlip started, and really all I did was just use a screwdriver to go inside the gears teeth. But now I got to smack this thing all the way down, and I really hate to do it because it's such a pain in the rear to get off. But I got to take this measurement too. So I just have a pipe here, and I'm just going to smack it down and get it seated. So now that circlip is in there, we're going to take a feeler gauge. The spec here is 3 to 9 thousandths, so relatively wide. And you're going to fit it in between this first thrust bearing or thrust washer and that first bush. And the 3 is not fitting in there at all. That's not working, unfortunately. So what you do is this thrust washer down here is what you get to adjust this. So I'm going to see if I can sneak in and get the thickness of these. There's, according to the workshop manual, there's 5 different ones you can have. So I'll take a look at what I've got in the other bag, see if I can take the thickness of this and take look at the other one, and then see if maybe I can get lucky here. So that looks like it's a 1260, and there's a 125 and a 128. So this other one looks like it's about 1155, 1.115, which is smaller than any of the choices. Now I got to see if I can get this circlip back off here, so that'll be fun. So I think I got this figured out. You can see my stack up here. What I did was I cut the circlip in half. I was able to figure out how to get it on and off, but it was not fun. And I'm hoping that that will provide me good enough tension on it. So anyway, you've got your thrust washer, then your top hat bushing for second gear, your smaller bushing for third gear, another spacer, and then I put that circlip in there and essentially lift it up. Now I can feel there's play in there, which is what I want. So I lift it up and use kind of the weight of the shaft here. The spec is 3 to 9,000, so pretty big spec. 3 goes well. 4 is getting pretty tight. I bet you 5 is not going to work here. Nope, can't get 5 in there. Oh, yeah, just barely, but a hard drag. So I'm going to say that that's good. And I don't know if I'm going to regret because of the circlip, maybe not putting enough pressure down on it, but I'll take my chances. Again, I'm not replacing components here. These are all stuff out of the original stack up from the overdrive. So that's the overall end float of all the bushings on your main shaft. And then the final thing we got to do is the first gear end float, and that sets up a little bit differently as well. And the greasy hand garage, as you would expect, goes into that. All right, so for the first gear end float, you set this up pretty much the same way as I did for the total end float, where you're kind of mocking stuff up, except this time I got to press this rear bearing on, which is going to make it a little bit more complicated. But you start with the first gear bushing, or excuse me, the first gear thrust washer, then the first gear bushing, and then this bearing has a slightly bigger with a wider landing area, I guess you could say. That guy goes on there, and now we're going to press this bearing on all the way, press it all the way down, and then we're going to put the other bushing or the other bearing, and then you got a circlip. So I'll go over to the press, I'll press this down, get this all the way tight, we'll fit the circlip, and then when you're done, you flop it over and you press this bearing back up against the circlip, and then you measure the end float in the gap just like we did for the other one. And that's, what's the spec here? 3 to 9 thousandths. So I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to press this. I got to look at that because the pipe that I have I think is too small to fit down here. So I'm going to, I might have to invent some tooling here, but we'll see what happens. I was able to use that pipe to press this bearing all the way down, so that's nice and tight on there. I got another spacer that goes on, and then I'll put this circlip on. Get that seated. All right, so now there's a little bit of play there, which is good. Now I got to come back from the other way and press down on this guy and put it hard up against the other side now, and then I'll be able to stick a feeler gauge in here and measure the end float. So that's where my trick is, because that pipe doesn't clear those gears there. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this yet, but we'll look around the shop here and see if I have anything that I can press down here on. And again, you don't want to press on the outside. I think I explained this in a previous video a while ago. You don't want to press on the outside of this stuff because the bearing's not made to support it that way, and you could break it across. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this yet, but we'll see what I can figure out. Got my handy dandy Harbor Freight bearing puller here, and all I'm going to do is, again, if you can see that, I got play here in the circlip and that spacer. All I'm going to do is snug it up so it comes this way more, and then I'll be able to measure, hopefully, a 3 to 9 thousandths end float there. All right, so now those are tight, and now this is loose, and we're going to go right to 9 because that made me a little nervous about how loose that was. And 9 fits a lot, so that's unfortunate. I do have another spacer that can fit in there, but I don't know how thick these are, so we're going to go ahead and unfortunately pull this back apart. And let's see here. Let's see if I can find out what the end float actually is. There's a 13. 13 just fits. 14 just fits. 15 fits. Getting worse instead of better. All right, so 16 does not. or if it does, it's a very hard drag. So that means I need a washer that's 5 thousandths thicker, and I don't think I have that. Let's see if I can cheat here without pulling it apart. So that's looking at about 121 or so. So this should have to be 127, and it's actually even thinner. So that's not working out for me real well. I do have another bearing in here that I can look at using. That potentially might be able to hook me up there and give me some help. So we're going to go ahead, smack that bearing back down a little bit, get that thing pulled back off, and see if I can't find another spacer that'll give me what I'm looking for. So I revisited it this time, and I'm getting about 9 thousandths. So I just took it all apart, cleaned it up again, put it back together, and I'm doing all right. So I'm going to move on from here. So what we have here is the 3rd and 4th grade Synchro, and the hub here. So it's 2-piece. You got the Synchro hub on the outside, and then inside you have the actual sliding member of it. And there are, I think there's 3 springs and balls that are in here to keep that tension. And there's a spec on this tension. It's like 25 foot-pounds or something like that you require. So I'm going to use my scale that I used when I was, what was I doing? Oh, you're measuring the springs on the shifting tension, if you remember, going into first, second, and third in the top cover. So this one, though, you'll have to set up. And again, the Greasy Hands Garage goes into it and shows you how to set it up. So I'm going to need a flat washer here and like an eye hook to come out straight up, and then be able to hook this onto that eye hook and pull up or pull down, depending on which way I can set it up. The trick is, though, is that you don't want this thing to come completely out, because there's the balls and the springs and everything go flying. Well, of course, there's a special tool for it, but essentially what the Greasy Hands Garage did is set this up in a vise in such a way that they were able to pull it down, and the vise, the way that it was set up, the vise would stop it from opening it up all the way. But I do want to go in and make sure there's no springs broken or anything like that. It feels good. And again, I definitely have evidence that this is all parts out of the non-overdrive gearbox, the original one. Definitely have evidence that this thing was rebuilt at some point. All these Synchro rings look in pretty good shape. The edges are sharp and very minimal to no wear. So I think I'm lucky in that. But again, because these balls are under spring tension here, I'm going to take it apart inside the bag. So you may or may not be able to see what I'm doing here. And doesn't look like anything went flying. Make sure I don't have anything stuck in here, and this looks good. So the inside of that's just a bunch of gear teeth. Give that a quick once over, make sure that looks fine, and it does. And then here you can see there's one little ball. Another ball there. The other one just dropped out. Oh, there's that one. So you need to keep track of these guys. Make sure they don't go rolling around on the floor, because you'll probably never find them. So I've got 3 of them in there. Yep. And then there's little springs in there, but you won't be able to see. I'm going to go get a little pick and pull them out. And again, all I'm doing here is checking that they're fine. Looks like this one's just going to come out. So there's the spring. And they're pretty stout little buggers. So that one's not broken. That one's not going to come out easy for me. And neither is that one. All right, so let me go to a little... Actually, I got a screwdriver right here. All right, it's got some schmata on it. But that spring looks good, feels good. And the other one, that looks good and feels good. And I'm going to recheck this one just in case. Yep, that looks good and feels good. So now we'll put the balls back in and then put this together. We'll do this outside of the bag. This thing is pretty oily, so you can use that oil to help hold on to stuff a little bit if you want. I'm going to lay this flat. Hope that the balls stay in there, and they're not. All right, and once you get it sit down on there, what I'm going to do is take a little flathead screwdriver and just kind of push in on one of the balls and see if I can't get that side to kind of angle in for me. keeping tension on. All right, there we go. That was a pain in the rear. You probably didn't see any of that either, did you? Oh well, I'll see how bad it looked in post-production. But we'll go ahead and set this aside. And we've got another one to look at. The first and second. Again, the Synchro rings look good, like they've been replaced at some point recently. And same kind of setup here. It looks different because it's a different gear set, but it's set up the same way. So again, we'll pop it out. Got 3 balls in there. Look at the springs. All right, and these springs all look good and feel good. On my Spitfire, when I rebuilt that, I'm pretty sure I had 1 or 2 or more of these springs broken. This is the same kind of design. So I definitely recommend checking them. All right, that one went a little better because I learned from my mistakes. So that's all back together. So next up will be to invent some way, check and measure the tension to make sure that these Synchro tensions are good. Before I get too far ahead of myself here, I want to just point out, I had said in the previous spot that this thrust washer here, I was putting it on without dropping it with the flat side facing up, and that's not correct. The flat side will go up because when you put the gear in, that kind of fits down inside of it and doesn't leave a gap in there. Workshop manual and everything that I could find doesn't really specify this too much. The Greasy Hands Garage that I could find doesn't really specify that. If I had paid a little bit more attention when I was taking it apart, I would have specified that. But I wanted to point that out. For the purposes of the bushing float, I don't think it really matters. And as a matter of fact, if you buy one of these new today, it's just a flat piece of metal. It doesn't have that cup at all. So I don't think it really matters. But if you have the original one, I wanted to point that out, that the correct orientation is for the cup to be facing up towards the circlip. So now on to measuring the tension of the Synchro bearings. What I'm going to try to do here is design something. I've got an eye hook. I've got a fender washer. I'm going to put that through like that and trap the fender washer in here and then pull on this eye portion here with my scale. And hopefully that'll allow me to measure how much tension it takes to pop this Synchro out. And the spec is in the workshop manual. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head here. I'll look that up in a second. So essentially what we're going to do is thread a nut on the top here so that the thing will stop. And a nut on the bottom. And then we'll put this through like this. And then what we'll do is we'll pull. You can see that. We'll pull on that hook. I'll set this up in a vise somehow so that I properly do it. Pull or push or something on this hook so that I can measure how much tension it takes. So let me now figure out how I'm going to set this up so stuff doesn't start coming apart on me, and we'll move on from there. Winging it as I go here, so this might not work, but obviously I've got the business here. So I've got an eye bolt. I wish I had bought one that's a little bit longer. I don't know what this 2-inch, 3-inch or so. I wish I had bought the next size up. But I got the eye bolt and a fender washer. So I'm going to stick that through like that. And then coming from the back side, I've got a larger fender washer. The other reason it's larger because I didn't know what sizes to buy because I didn't check ahead. So we're going to go ahead and put that on there. Get that tightened down. So now that kind of pinches Synchro in there, the Synchro hub. And I have a cap here to probably a 3-inch or so. I don't know how big this is. 2-inch it looks like, to a 2-inch PVC pipe. And I cut the square end off of it. And it just so happens that this Synchro hub that's on the inside there just fits inside this cutout in here. So my intention is, see how that just barely comes out there? That's why. You can see that, how that just barely comes out. That's why I should have gotten a longer run. But I'm going to go ahead and try to set this up now somehow to get it stable. Clamp it down maybe, I'm not quite sure. And use the luggage weight to pull up and see if I can measure the weight. So I've got this sticking out down here. So I'm going to either get a piece of wood and cut a hole in it. I have some of that, and clamp that to this piece of wood and then pull up and see if that works. This is the pedestal that I used for putting together the overdrive, taking it apart and all that stuff. Put a little hole in it, and essentially to accept that recess for the nut there. So we got that, put that on there, so now that fits nice and stable and flush. Got the cap, the modified cap. This is Fisher Special Tool 001 as opposed to Churchill Special Tool. Got some 6-inch just expandable clamps here. Go ahead and get that clamped down. All right, so now that's nice and tight, and I'm going to have to kind of lean on this a little bit. But now I should be able to take my scale, wherever I put it, there it is. Take my scale here, hook it around inside of that, and I should be able to pull up on it, and it should tell me how much weight it's going to take to do this. So let me look up the spec real quick, and we'll give it a tug. So just to be sure here, this is the 3rd and Top Gear Synchro hub or Synchro unit, and the workshop manual calls for 19 to 21 pounds, which means 20. So I'm not so sure that I'm going to be able to get this on camera here. It's going to be pretty quick. But once that zeroes up, make sure that it's actually zeroed. I'm going to pull. See when it releases. Oh, that's a lot more than 20. So either I've got something messed up here or... So as you can see, I got it set up in the vise here. So I got the bottom clamped on the vise and the top clamped with just a regular C-clamp. And we'll get this set up. And essentially all we're going to do is pull and read the weight when it pops. So there's 20, 21. Try that again. All right, go for a repeat here just for repeatability. So that popped at about 21 pounds, so it's the top of the spec. So that's going right at about 22 pounds, give or take, it looks like. I'm not going to worry about a pound with this. The way that I look at it is the stronger the springs, the harder it will be to get into gear, but the less likely it will be to pop out of gear, I think. So I'm not too concerned as, you know, if it's not 40 pounds or anything. Yeah, so that's pretty consistently going right at about 22 pounds. So as far as I'm concerned, this one is good. So we're going to go ahead and switch over now, hopefully, to the other guy. Now it's going to take me a little bit of time to get that, and that gear is differently constructed. So hopefully this same contraption will work. Here is the second one, and it works. So I just set it up so that I'm going to grab on to in here instead of out here. Though, I mean, I guess I could do it that way, but it's just going to give me a little bit flatter of a spot to grab onto with the vise here. So same setup where I've got it the thing clipped through, and we'll go ahead and get this into the vise here. And this one's, like I had mentioned, a little bit stronger. This is 25 to 27. And of course, I've got this C-clamp thing right in my way. All right, so we'll turn this guy on. Start pulling. There's 20, 25. All right, so right about 25 or 26. So that's amazing. I'll try this again here. $24, $25, yep, $26, $27 on that one. So I'm going to call that good. One repeat is good enough for me. Not too shabby. So again, just a 2-inch PVC pipe cap where I cut the top square portion off, and then a couple fender washers, a couple bolts, and an eye bolt, or a couple nuts and an eye bolt. Again, I would have gone with the next longer eye bolt just to give you a little bit more options, but this one did work. So that when you pull the gear, that fits right inside of there just right. Got lucky, perfect, just absolutely lucky. And putting it on the vise was the way to go. So again, the spec 20 to 21-ish for 3rd and 4th gear, which I came in a little bit strong, but not too bad, about a pound or two over. And then this guy here, 25 to 27 for the 1st and 2nd gear, and I seem to nail that just right. So that, I think, I'll do a quick review, but I think that's all the measurements that I need to take and all the checks that I need to do. I will mention one thing about the spring gear here, the scale here, is I wish that I could have found one that had like a maximum freeze on it. This one, if it stays steady for long, it'll lock, but it doesn't lock in at your highest or lowest weight that you get. There are some that I did find that did have that, but the things were like the industrial size. So, you know, I didn't really look all that long, and the thing was cheap. But that would have been convenient just so I had to pull one. I didn't have to necessarily, you know, watch the whole thing the whole time. But happy with the way that worked. And again, Fisher Special Tool #1. And I'll probably put my signature on that and put it away for the grandkids or something. So onward and upward. I think we're getting close to being able to reassemble the main shaft and start getting stuff into and populate the inside of the gearbox.